Hey guys, what's up? I am recording this live but private, so you don't see it live and we're not interacting live. But anyways, it is uh Tuesday. It's Tuesday, right? Tuesday night, and I just watched the State of the Union, and I went over my notes. Actually finished watching it a couple hours ago, and then I kind of let my mind rest after that shit show. Um, because the Iowa shit show happened yesterday, and then there was the Donald Trump shit show that just happened tonight with the State of the Union. And so I just wanted to kind of go over my notes and basically give you my takeaways and my review of the State of the Union. It was quite interesting. This is an election year, and so with that in mind, the State of the Union was a bit different than it normally is. In that you could tell that Donald Trump is now trying to actually like run for president once again. So, anyways, my big takeaways number one is that Donald Trump is a media master, and he knows exactly what he's doing. He knows how to work the camera. He knows like when he's on and what he's doing, the repercussions of what he's saying, and he works that crowd. And that's exactly what we saw tonight, from the exchanges that he had with Nancy Pelosi down to his showing Rush Limbaugh on stage, and then all those like kind of like prize moments that he had, reuniting family members. I'll get into all of that later. The second takeaway that I had for tonight was that he was really drumming up his base for 2020 and getting his talking points in on what he wants to do in the general election and in the rest of his presidency. So there was a lot of cultural signaling that he was taking part in, and then there was a lot that he was talking about. He talked about, I guess, in the first half hour, basically about the economic figures that he wants to show to his support. Um, with all of that in mind, not everything the president says is accurate. Like, I didn't go through the trouble of fact checking, but I know that on certain indicators that he was talking about, I was like, that's not right, or that's not what I knew to be true previously, or even talking about certain pieces of legislation that he was supporting. I was like, dude, you totally went against it. But all of that to say is that in this era, it doesn't matter, because all that really matters for him is who he's speaking to, and if he's getting the message across, and if he's making them feel that way that they did in 2016 to get them out to vote. My third takeaway from the State of the Union was that he's getting ready to take on Bernie Sanders in the general election. You could tell by the way that he was talking about certain things. He didn't bring up Bernie's name at all, but he brought up Bernie's ideas. And not just that, I think that Trump reframed a bit of his populist message in order to take on Bernie's counter populist message. So this lets us know that Donald Trump is a bit afraid of Bernie Sanders, and rightfully so. I still think Bernie Sanders is probably the best one to take on Donald Trump and defeat him in the general election. So let's start off. I'm going to try to make this one quick, guys. I hope I don't go too long on this, just because I'm over it. I think we're all like between Iowa and today, and then we still got to keep our eyes on what's happening in the Democratic primary process going forward. And also tomorrow is going to be the impeachment, the conviction or acquittal vote. It's going to be an acquittal, but that, like, I'm sick of it. And Donald Trump is so full of shit. I just like it's oh gosh, I just hate talking about him. Anyways, first thing I said, that he is a media master, and it started off when he didn't shake Nancy Pelosi's hand. He hands the vice president a copy of the State of the Union address. Then he hands it to Nancy Pelosi, and it was tough to see because of the angle of the camera. I don't know if every news network had it the same exact way, but you saw there was a camera from behind Pelosi and behind Vice President Pence, and he hands them the speech. He hands Nancy Pelosi the speech, and she puts her hand out to shake immediately, and he turns away. It happened very quickly, but then you see her reaction right after that, and that's where she was like, "Oh, well, Nancy Pelosi." And then at the end of the evening, or not the end of the speech, Nancy Pelosi very visibly just stood there and tore up the speech. Now, that was a very controversial moment. Of course, it's good red meat for Trump's base, uh, being that they hate Nancy Pelosi anyways. And I myself, I'm not a big fan of Nancy Pelosi. I am on the left politically, but I don't like Nancy Pelosi's ties to big money. And I just don't like the way that she's handled impeachment. And I think that she's compromised a lot of American people's values in the last couple of years. I don't think she's a good fighter for us in the resistance. Having that said, when you have a president that is just using the office of presidency and his stage and the platform in the House to act like he does and to have this kind of circus. Like I said, he's the ringmaster in chief. Like she can't be made to look a fool. So she has to do something in response strongly. So what else to do than to send the message, but to rip the speech up? Last year it was that like petty, like, ooh, like we all saw that. It was a good meme or whatever. This time it was memeable. But I don't know, it was heavier in a kind of way. It was um, honestly, that's how I felt about Donald Trump's speech, after watching the whole thing, dude, you were so full of shit, and what you're doing yet again in the country, you're just stoking those fears yet again just to get what the hell you want. And that's the presidency. And why do you want the presidency? Because it best serves you and your businesses. And there's so much frustration, and talking to my friends on the right, um, they always justify it by saying, "Oh, well, Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats are corrupt too." Well, they're corrupt, but they're definitely not as corrupt as Donald Trump. Donald Trump is like, he is the Michael Jordan of corruption. Like he is like corrupt, like, oh my god, like if he's the Michael Jordan of corruption, like Nancy Pelosi is probably, I don't know, the like the high school basketball coach of corruption, like that level. Like come on. um or maybe a little more corrupt, but still, like the level is just, it's crazy, it's crazy. So she had that moment. It probably was memeable, but Donald Trump's whole speech was a fucking meme, like everything. So let me go through it. Like, you know, bragging about the Space Force. I mean, you could take that for what it's worth, but that I'll get back to that too. But then also when he's talking about, I guess, this part I wasn't paying too much attention. The education part, I was watching it with my parents actually, and was a bit distracted. But I know that he was talking about education and school choice, and he had the young girl, African American girl, and her mother, Janiyah Davis, on stage, and he said something about like school choice and encouraging the Senate and Congress and House of Representatives to pass legislation for school choice. And then he awarded her with a scholarship. Am I wrong in picking that up? I think that was something. And then the whole moment with Rush Limbaugh, who's there, stage 4 lung cancer. Look, I never liked Rush Limbaugh. I never liked anything he stood for. I thought he was always a very divisive person. I think he's a racist. Uh, I think that he's spread nothing but hatred in this country. With that said, I wish him the best. I pray for him and his diagnosis, and I pray for his family. I hope there's a miracle in his recovery. I think that anyone who faces that kind of sickness, like I pray for them and for their health and the health of their family, and to get through. Even though I don't personally like him, I know that there's people that do love him. I'm not talking about fans that listen on the radio. I'm talking about like actual family members, brothers, sisters, cousins, children, nieces, nephews. So I don't have any ill will. But with that said, to have him there in the wake of his sickness, and then to award him the Presidential Medal of Freedom during the fucking State of the Union, this is unprecedented. Like, when does shit like this happen but in the Trump presidency? This is all a show that he's doing. So it was definitely like cultural signaling to his base. Like, I'm not saying if you listen to Rush Limbaugh, you're racist, but if you're racist, you probably listen to some Rush Limbaugh. So he's definitely throwing that red meat out for them. And then, yeah, then also the whole idea of, he brought up the manifest destiny. He's just kind of invoking this like America that he wants to have to sell to people who are going to eat it up. The manifest destiny to Mars. So that kind of ties in with the Space Force. So he's saying we want to put the American flag on Mars. So, this is kind of Reagan-esque and kind of creating this vision of America that he's trying to sell to the rest of the country. I'm just like, I'm way more focused on like, yeah. What are you going to do for us here who are living here and who are struggling now? The other thing, oh yeah, then he was talking to the family that had the father out who was deployed. I forget whether it was Iraq or Afghanistan, and um, then he was like, "Oh, and he's back, and he's actually here, and he's now not deployed anymore, so he gets to stay home." And that, like, again, like reality show moments. Like, he's totally just like, this is him. This is who he is. He's a showman. So, yeah, he's just a media master. He's giving the people, his base, what they want. Yeah, so that's point number one, my takeaway, first takeaway. Second takeaway was that he was drumming up the base. He's getting ready for the 2020 election, and he was definitely trying to drum up the base. Two different ways he was doing it. First, by touting economic numbers. He touted so many economic numbers. I'm not gonna go look them up, but he like, what was he saying? He was touting a lot of like low unemployment numbers for African Americans, for Hispanic people, for people with disabilities, for women, for so many different economic indicators. Um, are these signs of economic strength? I don't know. When you talk to people and like, yeah, maybe there's low unemployment, but how many of those jobs are part-time jobs? How many people are out of the labor force? Where is the money going to? What are the wages in those jobs? Are those jobs high wage jobs or high waged jobs, or are they lower wages? So where is the money that we are trying to recover from the 2008 economic crisis? Where is that going to? I have a feeling that for the last 10, 12 years, it's been going to the top, to the CEOs, to the rich, to the stock market returns that he touted. So he could tout those numbers as much as he wants, but it's not painting a real picture of what's happening on the ground economically. Yeah, one thing that I noticed was that he was really going in on this message of minorities for Donald Trump. Not only did he do that tonight, but he did that with the Super Bowl ad that he had. Super Bowl ad that where he was bragging about criminal justice reform. Let's just make this clear. Donald Trump didn't do any criminal justice reform. He granted clemency, which is a wonderful thing. Barack Obama did that at the end of his presidency. I forget how many people. He granted clemency to a record number of people. I don't know if Donald Trump has done more now, but I hope Donald Trump continues to do more. But that has nothing to do with actual criminal justice reform. It's just like, oh, I'm president. I have the power to get someone out of jail. So I'm going to do it when Kim Kardashian comes to my desk because it's a whole media event and she requests that someone gets out of jail. So good. It's good, but it's not actually reform. But anyways, not only was I started off talking about like he's going in on minorities for Trump. He started that with the Super Bowl, and then he did that tonight. He talked about getting people off food stamps. Now, this was controversial because even the way he worded it, he said, I got more people off of food stamps. Well, did you get them off of food stamps because they were economically doing better? Or did you get them off because of the increased regulations with food stamps that forced people off of food stamps who may have needed the food stamps before? So there was a lot of like backlash to that on the Democratic side, and exactly the kind of backlash that I was feeling when I was watching from home right now. So that's one thing. And then the other thing too, I noticed that like the first couple guests that he had introduced at the beginning of his speech, all African Americans. First, forget what piece of legislation that he had brought up, but he pointed directly to Senator Tim Scott, I think of South Carolina, who is I think I'm correct in saying he's the only Black Republican senator in the Senate. And then after that, he talked about Airman Charles McGee and his grandson wanting to go into the Space Force. But Charles McGee was a pilot in World War II, and so then he showed him, and he turned 100 years old recently, and look, he's pointing to all these African American figures that were his honored guests at the State of the Union. In addition to that, there was a guy, I forget his last name, Tony, and I think that he was talking about how he was once drug addicted. I forget how he said that his administration helped him or whatever. I don't even know if they did, but there was something. And then he said, oh, and then he invested in a construction company, and this is the story of American success. Again, pointing to two examples of how African Americans, according to him, are doing better under his presidency. Yeah. So yeah. Also, he's drumming up the bass when he was bragging about the MCA, the Mexico-Canada agreement, and how that replaced NAFTA. And then also he knows that his base, they love certain government programs like Medicare and Social Security. And even though in recent weeks, we're talking weeks, he's talking about cutting Social Security, he has the gall to stand there and say that he promises that he's going to keep those programs. If those are your concerns, Trump is not your guy. I'm telling you right now. And then, yeah, he goes more into the cultural signaling, especially with this anti-immigration message. This was just dark and like, it was bleak. It was like, he was talking about like Medicare for all, and I'll get back to that in a little bit, but he was like, yeah, illegal aliens are going to rip you off by getting on Medicare for all, and Medicare for all, you're just going to be paying for undocumented immigrants to get health care. So he's doing a lot of fear stoking yet again with immigrants. And then, yeah, he was talking about the heroic ICE officers. And then just a bunch of anecdotes that really say nothing about immigration in this country, but it just, when you tell stories of like one person, two people, three people being killed by immigrants in sanctuary cities and all this, and then bringing up the legislation to have let people be able to sue sanctuary cities or sanctuary states, that's all just feeding right into his base. It's red meat. Let's imagine this. He passes legislation that allows people to sue sanctuary cities or sanctuary states. How the hell does one go about proving that, even if it's an undocumented immigrant that commits a crime like that, how do you go about proving that it is the sanctuary status of the state that has allowed this crime to be committed? How do you go about proving that? So it's nothing that's actually doable, but it's definitely something that is going to, again, stoke up those fears that people have with immigration. Um Look, I don't know the way to combat that. I just think that you got to talk better to people's wants and needs and fears. And Trump is just going to the darkest place with it immediately. And I hope that the Democratic candidate can better talk to those concerns without doing what Trump is doing. It took Trump about an hour to talk about infrastructure, and when he did, the Democratic side, they stood up, they clapped a lot. And then he talked about wanting to get rural high-speed internet across the country. Now, why is it though that when like Democrats bring up the idea of having uh, high-speed internet for people in urban areas, Republicans get really pissed off? But when Donald Trump talks about it being available in rural areas, the Republicans stand up and praise him. Bunch of hypocrites. They're mindless hypocrites that have no actual like centered moral value. They're just following this clown in front of them. It's ridiculous. Let's see. Yeah, again, he went into merit-based immigration, which I'll tell you right now, if immigration was merit-based, I wouldn't be in this country right now. I want to be talking to you about American politics. Um, so it just that to me, it's just something personal I disagree with. And then he talked about religious freedom, and then he tied it to the Second Amendment. So again, he's just drumming up the base. Oh, and then also like he wanted to brag about killing Soleimani in Iran, and he somehow tied the killing of office not officer of the veteran from the Hague family, how they were, I think, like he got killed by a bomb in, I don't know whether it was Iraq, but he tied it um to Soleimani and ISIS, and it was just such a like not like an exact like tie to it, but he kind of just went in a roundabout way. Give me 1 second. I just want to like plug in my laptop because the battery is running low. And let me see if I could do this, if I could stretch it. There we go. Okay. Oh, crap. See, that's what happens. All right. Let's see if I finish off strong with this. Okay, and then he didn't bring troops home since he became president. So now he's running on bringing troops home again. He brought that up. So I don't know, man. I don't know. But my third takeaway from the State of the Union speech was that he is revving up to take on Bernie Sanders in the general election, and you could hear it from a bit of the rhetoric that he was using. He never mentioned Bernie by name, like I said, but he was talking about, like, the growth rate of the wealth of the bottom half of the country versus the top 1%, how the bottom half is growing even more. And you always hear Bernie Sanders talk about 1% versus the bottom half. Um, Trump also used the term, we're seeing a blue collar boom. Is that really the case? And then there was this whole thing in Trump's speech where he was just going in on this anti-socialist message, and it started when he was talking about how he reenacted restrictions between or more stringent relationship between the United States and Cuba, and then also with Nicaragua and Venezuela as well. But then also the craziest part of this whole thing was that not only was he talking about Venezuela, but he actually had the president of Venezuela, not Maduro, but Juan Guaido, who he invited to the State of the Union and kind of just showed him off. And this is a guy that's been propped up by the United States. And Maduro has been repressed by U.S. operations, CIA operations. And so, like, he's really going in on this, like, anti-socialist message, being that Maduro represents a more socialist agenda in Venezuela, and Juan Guaido represents the American, uh, I guess, American hegemony around the world and our economic structure that we're trying to dominate the rest of the world with. Um, so he wants more of this U.S. intervention, uh, that is represented by what's happening in Venezuela. And let's not forget, Bernie Sanders mildly came out for support for Maduro, but then he also in Bolivia, that he supported Evo Morales there. Um, Whereas the United States supported the ousting of Morales. So it seems that, like, Trump is going strong on this anti-socialist message. So I think he's likely going to try to hit Bernie Sanders with it. In addition to that, he talked about Medicare for all and how it's a socialist program and it's going to give health care to immigrants and undocumented immigrants, and that's not something we want to do. So I think we're seeing a little preview of what the race this year is going to be about. Look, whoever the Democrats nominate, Trump and the Republicans are going to call them a socialist. So it doesn't matter whether it's Bernie or not. I think that he's going to try to equate whoever it is as, like, running on Medicare for all, which Bernie Sanders is really the only one that has a viable Medicare for all plan. So I don't see how you could tie it to anyone else if they get the nomination. But it does look increasingly like Bernie Sanders will get the nomination. Hope so, but we'll see. Iowa was kind of crazy. So I said I wanted to go short. I didn't, but who cares? I hope it was informative anyways. That's my reaction to the State of the Union. Look, I'm not a fan of Trump at all, but I try to keep it real. I try to at least understand how people view him, people that like him view him. I actually have quite a bit of family and friends who are supporters of Trump. And while it drives me crazy, I just listen. And that's the most important thing that I could do. And it never, like, the math never ends up right. Like, whenever I hear what they're saying and their concerns and stuff, and then I, like, kind of bring it back to what Trump is offering and says he's going to offer, what he wants to do. I'm like, those don't go together. Like, you're just basically, like, feeding into all the cultural shit that Trump is talking about. You basically just don't like the same things that Trump doesn't like, and therefore you think that you guys want the same thing for our country, but you don't. He's diametrically opposite to what you want. But it's like, I don't know. I hate to say it, people just they don't go that deep into it. And I'm trying to get people, get a little engaged, figure it out, see what Trump's messages actually mean. If you still support Trump, what does that say about you? Like, I'm not saying that it says you're racist or that you're anti-woman or that you're whatever. It might just mean that you are okay with the status quo. You're okay with a little bit of racism. You're okay with a little bit of well, a lot bit of xenophobia and a lot bit of racism. You're okay with that just to maintain the status quo because the status quo is working for you. And if we could all just be honest about it, I think we'll have much better conversations. So I guess that's where I'll leave you at today. Sorry, the camera went off a little bit and it's about to fall over. So I think that's my signal. I'm going to get out. This is Johnny Jabbour on Johnny's Jabs. Follow me on Instagram or Twitter at Johnny Jabbour, JohnnYJabbour. Give me a like, subscribe, share all of it, and I'll catch you later on Johnny's Jabs. Peace. How do I end this? Oh, here we go.